Good evening, America and Canada, for that matter. Welcome to Water Break. I got my Canadian mug right here. For those who are in crazy blue COVID states or Canada, sure. The question I want to ask you this evening is, are you a refugee or are you a reinforcement? My guest today is Pastor Dave Hatcher, and most of the Water Break team is lined up and ready for you. So grab your best scotch or Dr. Pepper and enjoy the show. But first, today's culture shifts like sand, but New St. Andrews College is established on Christ, the immovable rock. It is a premier and a primer. I think I did that last time too. It's a premier institution that forges evangelical leaders who don't fear or hate the world. Guided by God's word, they take the world back because they're equipped with the genius of classical liberal arts and God-honoring wisdom. Thanks to a faculty dedicated to academic rigor and to God's kingdom. Find out more at nsa.edu. That's nsa.edu. It's the real NSA. Cannonball or belly flop? Reinforcements or refugees? For those who are awake, understand that and kind of understand that we are living in political tumultuous times. This is particularly the case if you're living in coastal leftist states and Canada. San Diego School District has already declared students will be required to mask when school starts up again already. Or the students can Zoom. They can tune in Zoom if they don't want to wear a mask. DC will be requiring all students ages 12 and up to get the vaccine in order to attend in-person classes. And Canada is resuming random COVID testing for air travelers, sort of like our random TSA checks. Can you say theater COVID measures, theater security? As a side note, my friend Andrew D. Bartolo, who was here this past week, as he was flying back from the U.S. coming into Canada, no one was required to wear a mask until they started their descent into Toronto. So for an hour and a half, the flight, no one was wearing a mask, and the Canadian government thinks they're fighting COVID by requiring people to wear masks the last 20 minutes of the flight. Tyranny is not reasonable, which is why you resist it when it's in its infancy. Before we go any further, it has to be said that our countries, U.S. and Canada, who I'm specifically addressing today, are in this position because fathers have abdicated their responsibilities and the church has abdicated her responsibilities in various ways. We've talked about that numerous times and different times on the show. We aren't going to go into that right now, but we need to learn from this, that in God's world, if we do not follow his design order, and in this case, we're talking about how he has ordered the church, the family, and the civil governments, then the imbalance created by that abdication will give room to one of the other governments taking over the abdicated space. The civil government has done everything. The civil government has done this very thing as both the church and the family governments have abdicated their responsibilities. So if we want the church government to shrink, the church and family need to repent right in this very place, right where we're abdicating this authority and giving over to the government in this very spot. So here we are. We have very difficult states like California, the state of Washington, which is where my guest, Pastor Dave Hatcher, is from, and in Canada, the most conservative province in Canada was the province that was arresting pastors. And then, of course, Ontario's pretty crazy, too, in Canada. One of the things I'm grateful for in all this is that God, in his kindness, has brought together a lot of like-minded pastors, churches, and families who understand the moment we are in and are trying to figure out what is the best way forward. I've been very grateful to experience new friendships from a lot of the pastors in Canada who are resisting, and a lot of new friendships here in the U.S. from kind of this awakening. The other thing that this COVID moment has revealed is that a lot of Christians have put themselves in vulnerable situations and have realized that they need to make some big changes in their lives. These vulnerable situations include attending church that has soft leadership. They've kind of woken up to that. Realizing your kids in public schools, not a good idea. And not having a solid local community is another one. That's been kind of a big one. And fathers realizing that they have not led their family well, and so forth. This has caused a lot of social, economic, ecclesiastical, and even geographical movement in these last 2 years. My church grew by 500 people in the last year alone because of kind of that ecclesiastical shift. A lot of people switched churches, moved to a different city, state, or country, even a different country, changed jobs, and and more, all because of this COVID shakeup. Now, if you are in one of these kind of commie government situations, there are really two categories. Not really two categories. There are two categories I want you to consider. Are you a reinforcement in your land, or do you need to seek refugee status in a new community? Are you in a good situation where you have a good church, a good community, a good, post to fight from? Are you in a position of weakness with no church, no solid classical Christian school or like-minded community? If you have a good post to fight from, don't leave. Don't abandon that post. This goes for you, Canada. This goes for you in those coastal states. Stay and fight. Be an encouragement to your pastor. Run for city council. Figure out ways to push back. My guest this evening is Pastor Dave Hatcher. Dave attended Washington State University, where he graduated with a BA in business administration. He also has 3 years postgraduate work at Greyfriars Hall in Moscow, Idaho, which is our pastoral training program that I attended. Dave is the pastor of Trinity Church. Dave and his wife, Kim, have 6 children, 5 of whom are Providence graduates, their local classical Christian school. So welcome to the show, David. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Gabe.
So Pastor Dave, you're a pastor in one of those, I would say, difficult states, the state of Washington. How has your church been thinking about these last 2 years? How have you guys kind of responded? I know this is kind of a big opening question. How have you kind of responded? And what does it look like moving forward for you guys in the state of Washington?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. God did wonderful things for us through this whole COVID lockdown stuff. We were at a Seventh-day Adventist church, renting that church when COVID broke. And we were at that point they had gone through a leadership change. And after having been there for nearly 20 years, they had changed their policy and now told us that we would no longer be able to have wine in communion. And this was causing us to say, okay, we've got to find another place to go. So what are we going to do? Well, COVID hit, everything shuts down. Nobody and the SDA church completely shuts down. Won't let us meet there. Won't do anything. We did a couple of weeks of live stream, and then we were able to find a parking lot in Woodinville, Washington, which is kind of our center, and it's where our church office is. Uh-huh. We met in a parking lot, did outdoor parking lot services for the entire summer. That was at 2020, 2 years ago.
Wow.
Now, what was so ironic is that while we were there, we were able to serve communion, and we used wine, and we were in a parking lot surrounded by wineries, by wine tasting rooms and stuff. Yeah. In fact, we actually gave our moms bottles of rosé on Mother's Day, and we gave our fathers bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon on Father's Day. Beyond that, we ended up getting a place where we're now meeting. The SDA is still, last I checked, still shut down or still doing basically virtual services or some kind of a mix or something going on. Yeah. Got out of there. We now meeting in a place where we can do worship our own without any problems with the landlords.
Yeah.
And we had to do that. Well, knowing that we were breaking several of the government, the county rules and those kinds of things, right, dealing with being reported and that kind of thing. But we were small enough, and I think able to just not respond, and we got through that time. During that time, our community really grew and came together. In fact, during that time, we actually raised money to purchase land just outside of Woodinville City. We now own a piece of property that we're beginning to pray about how to go about building on that and putting a permanent building there. So we're here to stay. We're here to stay and fight.
Yeah.
And it's been a great blessing.
So, here in Idaho, we've had not just our church, but just a lot of Californians moved here just to come to a freer state, or as they would see it. We had this. One of my friends had their house bought by some lawyer from Portland. Don't even know the guy. I think paid like $1.3 million in cash for the house. So we have all these people moving over to Idaho because of kind of how these states have really discouraged freedom. So I assume you've sorted through a lot of these questions about maybe even yourself personally. Man, should I stay? Should we stay and do church here? How should we, live in a government that wants to fine us for obeying God? How do you cancel? Let's just bring this down to the family level. Or actually, before you get there, how have you kind of thought through that question yourself as you guys kind of maybe dealt with some initial, small persecution and all this?
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, first of all, we had the opportunity that to have real practical Bible study on the issues of sphere sovereignty, on the
Yeah.
issues of what it means to have a government of the family, government of the church, government of the state, how those are to interact with one another, how they all are under the authority of the Lord Jesus, and then how we are to operate together.
Yeah.
And instead of it just being a book that you read, we really had to wrestle through what were our responsibilities as a church.
Right.
And again, what really that caused, along with a lot of debate and discussion among our people, but for the most part, it caused us to realize the seriousness, the reality of the church community.
Right.
That we aren't just a club that's meeting on Sunday and we happen to have similar beliefs and stuff, but we're actually the church militant. We're the light here shining the gospel in the world. And when we took that kind of stand and just kept on worshiping, kept on meeting to worship, we started seeing a lot of people come and join us because other churches were shut down, or they were revealing within some of those churches even other kinds of wokeness and different kinds of things, and
Right.
people had it. And they joined us, not only us, but also we have two sister churches right here in the area,
Right.
CREC churches, and all three churches have seen really strong growth with really wonderful, like-minded people. And it feels to us like God's just bringing us reinforcements. God's giving us more and more opportunities to
Yeah.
have a witness here for the gospel of grace of the Lord Jesus Christ. Not so much we're not here to stand against the government. We're here to stand against sin and to offer the grace of Jesus Christ, and then in His lordship, proclaim that lordship everywhere we can.
So how would you counsel a family that maybe is processing, should I stay in Washington, or should I stay in Dave's church, or should I move out of Washington? How do you kind of help a family in that situation process that conversation?
Yeah. Well, we've had a lot of people who have decided to leave, that not just during the COVID years. People have left over years for all kinds of different reasons.
Sure. Yeah.
And for the most part, nobody has come. People aren't really coming to us and saying, "Well, because of COVID or because of the government suppression kinds of things, should we leave or stay?" Oftentimes, people are leaving because cost of living is very expensive here, and they're trying to get a family going, or they have some other opportunities, and they do see that another state things are freer and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
For the answer to that question, how do I counsel, is it totally depends. Depends for that family. Need to make their own decisions and stuff. But it's just not true in our situation that there isn't community, and in fact growing community, opportunities for education for your children, opportunities to worship the Lord on the Lord's Day and be part of a great church, opportunities to be serving one another and your neighbors. I remember when back in 2020, remember Chop Jazz, that whole thing downtown Seattle?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
There's whole 6 square acres of land that was claiming to be its own nation now, and that's in downtown Seattle. It'd take 20 minutes to drive down there from where we are if there was no traffic.
Yeah.
I had a call from a friend in Alaska wanting to know if we were okay because Seattle was burning down.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the problem sometimes is sometimes there is real tyranny. There's real issues going on here in the government. There are real crazy stuff going on here, but there's a whole lot of really good, faithful people that are doing a lot of really good, faithful things. We're supporting and coming alongside some of the crisis pregnancy centers right in our area, some of whom have already been vandalized since the Roe v. Wade thing. We're helping them, helping pay for them to have security on their premises, and even talking to them about how we can help them out. And that's just helping us to grow together with a growing body of Christians who are taking a stand here for Jesus.
So in some sense, for the longest time, I think conservative Christians, I think, had rightly identified like, hey, our government's getting too big. It's starting to do some, small t tyranny things. But no one would really acknowledge it, or they just say it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
But now that 2020 happens, we can kind of say, okay, I think it's a little clear that our government is not in a healthy situation. It has too much power, that kind of thing. Now that given what you know now about your government in the state of Washington, how do you as a church think about the next 10 years, the next 20 years of building church, building community, building your Christian classical school that you're part of, and so forth? How do you think about moving forward, given what you know now about your government?
Yeah. Well, we talk about, we have this piece of property. We want to build a church. We really do want to be a physical presence that says Jesus is Lord, and you are welcome to come and join us in worshiping the King of Kings right here, and He will make an impact on the rest of the city. We believed before COVID. We believe now that worship is the central, primary calling of a Christian and the primary work of warfare against the powers of darkness. And so our emphasis has always been and always will be to gather on the Lord's Day, to worship Him, sing the psalms He's called us to, preach His word, celebrate the Lord's Supper, and watch what God does with that. Watch what happens after He has shaken the heavens and the earth as we've gathered before Him in the heavenlies. And then from that, we see opportunities both as a church to serve or to speak the truth in different ways. We are thinking, one of the things we have thought about and is to try to focus. The greater Seattle area is huge, and so trying to really focus on a local center area and get folks kind of focus on a smaller target in essence, to begin to really minister to
change, Woodinville instead of all Seattle, focus on a smaller area.
Right.
I have you might have heard of Pastor Jacob Brahm. He's one of the Canadian pastors up in Waterloo area, and I just talked to him this past week, and it just struck me. He's got $9 million in fines, and I think 9 years of jail pending. He's got each elder has $1 million in fines, and up to a year in jail, and then the church has $50 million in fines. Just incredible. But how, like that first of all, that wasn't bothering him at all, and how positive and how encouraged he was talking about ministering to his community. It was incredible. And I think that I get a similar feeling kind of talking to you about Seattle, about Woodinville area, is that, I know the classical Christian school that you guys are a part of, I know it got fines, and I know you guys have kind of been pestered by all these COVID laws, for lack of better words. But you're seem very positive and unfazed kind of what's happened these last 2 years.
Rejoicing. We're not being persecuted, in a huge way at all. But Jesus says we might as well practice it right now with little bits.
Amen.
When you're persecuted, you're supposed to rejoice and give thanks. Apparently God's up to something, and the enemy doesn't like it, and that's good. That's a great thing. So, also why remain positive and optimistic? Well, because Jesus said that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So go. I would assume Seattle's included. Woodinville's included. Go disciple Woodinville. Go disciple your neighborhood. Go disciple your county. And believe that, at the end of that, He says, and lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. So, I mean, for the whole Christian, what the history of Christianity is about, taking new land, taking new places, or renewing. There certainly are times that maybe that Christians have had to retreat, or Christians have had to protect themselves and do things to avoid persecution. I don't think we're in that situation right now here. I think we're in a situation where we have great opportunities. This whole woke stuff is creating. I've had the opportunity to talk to people, for instance, who've tried to change their sex, try to change their gender, come to realize sometimes years and decades later what a wrong decision that was. Repent and come to the Lord and be broken people who really need help. Well, I think we're going to see a whole bunch more of that. Broken people who realize that they have finally reached a dead end of their self-serving, self-worship, rebellion against God in so many of these ways. And we should be here for them. We should be here to welcome them to the Lord Jesus Christ, just as he has welcomed us.
Pastor Dave, what's your church's website? What time do you guys have church on Sunday morning?
We are trinitykirk.org. TrinityKirk.org is our website. We meet just outside the Woodinville area, actually at the school's location at 10 a.m. on Sundays. And you can find more information about us on that website.
Thank you, Pastor Dave, for coming on. Appreciate your ministry. Lord
Thanks
bless.
for having me, Gabe. Take care.
All right, let's get Team Water Break into the room. I want to bring in both Rhett and Jacob for this time. And you know, if you guys have followed Rhett and Jacob, Rhett was actually a missionary to Turkey, and Jacob came from India into the United States to work on his ministry. So thinking through this whole scenario of what it looks like to be a refugee, maybe need to leave a state, or maybe you need to leave a situation and kind of strategically retreat back to a better spot for you and your family, or what does it mean to be a reinforcement in a city or in a state or even another country? So Rhett, when you kind of put that into context, you worked as a missionary in Turkey, I think for 8 to 10 years, and you went into a situation that was worse than, you know, my previous guest in the state of Washington, Pastor Dave Hatcher. You know, given the context, the difference between kind of reinforcement and refugee, why would a missionary, why would you decide to leave the comforts of, I think you were in South Carolina, or leave the comforts of the U.S. and go into a country like Turkey to become a missionary?
Sure. Well, I think is what Pastor Hatcher just said. You know, Jesus is about taking land. And so the reason, you know, we wanted to do that is because Jesus is winning the entire world, you know, every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And so we wanted to be a part of that and be a part of what God was doing around the world. You know, all peoples, bringing all peoples the gospel. We wanted to go and take the gospel to where the gospel was not. Thinking about Romans 15, where Paul wanted to preach Christ where he had not been named. So that was our motivation. And so while I agree in principle with what you have said about, you know, finding a strong post to, you know, to man that post and to fight from that post, I agree in principle with the wisdom of that, but also recognize that at times, some of us, we need to go out and establish new posts. And so I think both of those are legitimate, depending upon just a bunch of different factors, maybe your family situation, life situation, gifting, skills, all of those things kind of factor into what you need to do there. But I do think there's something to be said for going out and establishing new posts. I think both of those are legitimate. I've done both. And so we've moved to the mega city. That's 99.9% Muslim. We've moved to another provincial capital where I knew of one other Christian in the entire city when we moved there. And now we're in upstate South Carolina, which is a pretty strong post to fight from, and working on, you know, strengthening community here in a small town called Travelers Rest, South Carolina. And so done both, think both are legitimate, and see a lot of wisdom and fruit in both.
Yeah. Now, Jacob, you moved from India to the United States. I believe originally you came here to get your master's or your PhD. I can't quite remember. Forgive me for that. But you came from India to the United States to kind of shore up your Christianity, shore up your faith, shore up your academic. Why did you come to the U.S. and what was that transition like going from India to the U.S.?
Yeah, Gabe, for us, it was clear that God was calling us to the Western world, and studies was just a way to actually move here, and God opened that door for us. Now, this is what I want to mention. I agree with Rhett that we should be going and engaging in missions around the world. And that was a very call for us with regards to moving here. And I think there's a need for us to understand that while a lot of people are moving out to other places to find refuge and to find a community that they can commune with, there's a need for us to also understand this, that we need to reinforce biblical values and foundation that's been laid already in the Western world. So for us, the mission call was more in terms of not just evangelism in terms of individuals, but also to understand the need to evangelize the culture, the need to actually reinforce the foundation that's been laid here in the Western world, not just for the sake of the Western world, but also the rest of the world. Whether we like it or not, a lot of what we believe and how things work out here in terms of our faith kind of trickles down around the world. Now, we need to understand this, that the rest of the world has not had what the Western world had. They never had Christendom. So what happens is that in those nations, like, for example, where I come from, they only function with two sovereignties. One is of the state, the civil government, and the other is church. And what happens is that the family and the individual capitulates to the demands of the civil government, because there is no option for homeschooling, for example, in those countries, in those nations. So they become very, very isolated and insulated. And there's a danger in that it leads to a kind of a legalism that happens where, and somehow people tend to adopt this idea of escapism. They abandon their post, and there's this longing for the other world, whereas not being responsible for the world that God has already given us.
Right.
And I think biblically we have a mandate, as much as it might be necessary for us to sometime move to a place where we may find that community. But there's also a mandate for us to excel in exile. And Bible is full of those stories, and we should be redeeming those opportunities wherever possible. There's one thing I would just mention is that in terms of our motivation, we should be checking our motivation, whether we stay in a place where things are difficult or move to a place where we find a community. We should be asking this. Are our motivations, the foundation or the grounding of our motivation is a consumeristic mentality? If that's the case, I would say take a pause. Don't just move to a place because you want to, it's going to benefit you and your family. But go with this attitude that you need to be a reinforcement even there and contribute to the communities that you're moving to. And that is as much as necessary as much as it is necessary in a place where things are not the way we want to be.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who have moved or are considering moving, part of it, I do think there's a temptation. Grass is greener on the other side. I don't like my difficult situation, or it feels hard to be a church here in the city right now. We're getting fined, or whatever the case may be. But maybe part of this perspective, Jacob, what was it like for you as a Christian? Was it easier to be a Christian in India, or was it easier to be a Christian in California? What was that transition like for you and your faith?
I wouldn't say it did come with a lot of challenges, especially what happens is that you get marginalized as a minority. And here in the Western world, Christianity is not as minority as it is back in India. So in that regard, as I mentioned, church used to get completely isolated. They insulate themselves so much from the world that there is no actual involvement with the world that God has given us. Mm-hmm. And it does bring a lot of challenges in the sense that you may not be able to apply for promotions. You may not be applied for better schools. You may not be able to, just do things that people usually tend to do who have more say in terms of how culture should look like. So it does bring challenges. At the same time, things are different now. The persecution earlier times was more in terms of ideas, persecution in terms of engagement at ideological level. But now it has moved more in terms of persecution, in terms of physical abuse. Churches are being burned. Pastors are being beaten. They've been, just completely demonized in one sense. And that is doing... in a way, if I may say, this is also what happens in the midst of persecution. Churches are waking up and realizing that the need for them to build good reinforcement in terms of raising up their families with the values that are necessary for them to be fighting for their faith to the point of losing their life. And I think we are not there yet here in the Western world, but that's where we might be heading. So this is a time for us to be asking those questions and preparing ourselves. Are we ready to face those challenges that we might be approaching to?
Mm-hmm. And Rhett, you're in South Carolina, so you haven't really maybe had to wrestle through, in one sense, for your local congregation, do refugee status or reinforcement status. How are you kind of thinking about being in South Carolina, knowing what other governments have done, what New York has done, what state of Washington has done, and so forth? How are you teaching and preparing, and building your community, your congregation in such a way, whereas maybe to avoid South Carolina becoming in Washington?
Sure. Well, teaching on biblical, roles of government and sphere sovereignty and things like that. I think being grateful for the fact that we do have a strong foundation here in South Carolina politically. I mean, there were some things here I didn't like with COVID laws and back in 2020, but on the whole, things went fairly well here in South Carolina. My encouragement, to kind of thinking along these lines to people that are in maybe harder situations, I think about that great G.K. Chesterton quote where he talks about the one perfectly divine thing on earth, the one glimpse of God's paradise on earth is to fight a losing battle and not lose it. And so whether I'm talking to people who are here in South Carolina with a pretty good strong foundation, or to people in maybe a more vulnerable spot, I want them to be committed to doing the work of not losing. And so that is, we just because we're in a good spot in South Carolina, we don't sit on that. We want to be in communication with our legislators. We want to be in communication with our county council. We want to be, advocating for those things. We want to be teaching and building up strong families here in the church who are ready for to face whatever comes, ready for self-government, and then also ready for persecution from the state government, whatever it is. We want to be committed to doing the work of not losing, trusting God to do what He does with our faithfulness. And so, Pastor Hatcher talked earlier about what God does with with the worship of His people, and so that's what we're teaching on and emphasizing here in South Carolina.
Have you seen a mental kind of mentality shift in your community over the last couple of years in South Carolina? Has there been kind of a discussion on, to me, I could see the obvious discussions happening in Washington. Gosh, man, it seems like this government's getting more tyrannical. Governor Inslee, as we call him, incompetent Inslee. I mean, he's fining schools for not wearing masks, for not enforcing social distancing at school, stuff like that. So to me, the mentality could be easier to see over in Washington, but in South Carolina, what have you seen in the mentality in South Carolina? Has there been kind of an awakening about kind of government tyranny and
yes and no. I mean, there's been a wide variety, and so it really depends on who you're talking to, what their experience has been. Yes, there's been a general uptick in people being aware of just kind of what's going on around the country. But it really depends on the person. Some people, I think, are just really oblivious to what is going on and what could go on. And then other people are very wary about government tyranny and things like that. But it really is a wide variety that I have seen kind of along that spectrum. But if I were to kind of categorize it on the whole, it's not the same as it is in places like Canada, like watching where it is immediate and they're facing fines and they're facing those hard decisions. Right. Those decisions, a lot of that was faced early on in 2020, and then things kind of relaxed, and we've been able to kind of go forward since then, more or less normal. Most of the things have been minor inconveniences here since then. And so I think it's put people maybe just a little bit at ease, but we do have people who are coming. I talked to a guy yesterday. He's right across from our church, and he moved here from California, and I asked him why, and he said, because of California. And so we have those people who, a lot of people who are moving here, and they are on guard against that very thing.
Yeah. Jacob, you just to finish up here, you actually have a conference coming up that you're working on, the Bonson Conference. You want to tell our listeners a little bit about that? You're speaking there. I believe Pastor Wilson's speaking there, Jeff Durbin's speaking there, David Bonson speaking there. You want to talk about that and give the dates and website and everything?
Yeah. So for more details, the things are actually still working on in terms of like the details. But if someone is interested, they can look up bonsonconference.org. So as the speakers that you mentioned about, the idea is basically also to understand and also to speak in terms of the importance of the presuppositional apologetics. How does that work out in terms of practical aspects of our life, and why we need to be really speaking more in terms of that particular approach of apologetics. So we have a great lineup coming up. I'm not the organizers, I'm one of the speakers there. Okay. So if someone is interested to learn more about it, you can visit bonsonconference.org, and registration is open. I believe there's a huge demand here in Southern California. People are really excited to be attending this conference because we don't get to actually get this kind of lineup that easily here. So things are moving, things are changing here a lot. Even in Southern California, people are getting really motivated to be engaging in the forefront on cultural issues. So this conference is basically to help people navigate through those ideas and to be prepared in terms of analyzing and advocating a Christian worldview into our culture.
That's fantastic. What were the dates on it? I don't think you mentioned the dates.
So this one is starting from 17th, 18th, and 19th, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday
in
November.
In November. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Rhett and Jacob, thank you for joining the Water Break team. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is that time. News that John Branyan can trust. As you guys know, I don't even know if you know this, but NPR actually started a disinformation committee, I guess, coming from NPR.
Is that what they're calling it?
Yeah, something.
Are they calling it a disinformation committee at NPR?
I don't know if they're calling it committee, but I know it's disinformation something. It's close enough. NPR, government news, government media, disinformation. It's going to go well. So me and John Branyan, our goal is actually to combat the disinformation that's coming from the disinformation committee. That's our goal. And so that's why we are doing news that John and Brennan can trust, because the only people you can trust in our land right now are comedians. Dave Chappelle, Bill Barr, not Bill Barr. What's his name? Bill Burr.
Bill Burr. We're going to talk about him today.
Good. So news that John Branyan can trust. Now this is, I think no one's doubting this. There isn't any disinformation here, but right now, 76 pregnancy centers and churches have been attacked since the Roe v. Wade, first the leak, because there were some churches that were originally attacked after the leak, and no one has been put into custody. The FBI is not even looking into it. 76 pregnancy centers. It blows my mind that the FBI is not even really looking into this.
Well, the people who are demolishing churches and pregnancy centers are not practicing what they preach, because they're all about, my body, my choice. And if it doesn't belong, you keep your hands off of my body. I get to make my own decisions. That should also apply to pregnancy centers, shouldn't it? I mean, if it's not your pregnancy center, then you shouldn't be able to demolish it.
Not your pregnancy center, not your choice.
Right. You should be able to do whatever you want with your pregnancy center. If you've got a pregnancy center, you want to set it on fire, you want to break the windows, go for it. But my pregnancy center, my choice. Aren't these the same people who were screaming that Christians don't provide care for babies after they're born? Aren't these the same people? They were like, you only care about babies before they're born. You don't care about babies after. You don't provide care after birth.
Fact, man. Yes.
We do provide care, but you set it on fire.
You burned it down.
Yeah, I actually don't. I don't want the arrest to even take place unless there's going to be consequences. Quite honestly, because capturing these people and then making them famous and then turning them loose 15 minutes later, it's kind of counterproductive. Violence is actually the cheapest, most effective marketing available these days.
Well, at some point, someone's got to be held accountable for this. It's pretty egregious. Like all these churches, all these pregnancy centers, and it's like, and the FBI is like,
Well, I don't think the FBI is gonna call them to account. I think they're going to be held accountable, but it ain't going to be the FBI.
Yeah,
that holds them to it.
All right. So news that John Brennan can trust. There are, according to the National Women's History Museum. Okay,
the what?
National Women's History Museum.
We have a women's history museum?
We do. I wonder do we have a men's history museum?
Why do we need a women's history museum? Can't we just have a history museum and let women be part of it?
Well, we don't even know what a woman's anymore, so I don't even know why we call it a women's history museum. There are 3 featured ladies who have changed history. Okay, according to the National Women's History Museum.
Only 3?
Well, so they're highlighting. You know, they always
okay.
highlight, you know, right.
Okay.
And you can actually go on their website and you can see who they're highlighting right now.
Okay.
One is Rachel Levine, who's not a woman.
Mm-hmm.
That's our assistant health secretary man who's dressing like a woman. The other one is Andrea Jenkins, who is, you guessed it, not a woman. Yep.
Yeah.
And lastly, actually, I don't know who this one is. Cecilia Chung. Do you know who Cecilia Chung is? Apparently, he's also not a woman.
So we got 3 dudes being recognized by
That's right.
By the National Women's History Museum as influential.
Yeah, that's changing history.
Okay, you know what bothers me about this, Gabe, is
What?
that you brought it up and expect me to come up with something funnier than the headline itself. I mean, if this relationship is going to work, you're going to have to stop doing that. There's no way I could top that.
That's funny.
Three dudes are influential in women's history. That's the punchline. I can't top that.
Where do you go with this?
Well, okay. What about this?
There's got to still be an angle here. Like,
there's got to be an angle. How about this?
Okay, give it to me. Give me the angle.
Well, what about other museums? You know, we've got a National Women's History Museum for some reason, and these dudes are in it. So, what's next? Are we going to have is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame going to recognize Mozart for his contribution to heavy metal? How about the football? How about the football Hall of Fame?
Mozart has contributed to heavy metal.
How about the football Hall of Fame? I think the Football Hall of Fame should recognize these 3 dudes because these guys have been just important.
Ooh, news that John Brennan can trust. It had to be, the internet had to come in and mess it up. If John, I don't, you might not be able to hear me because it's breaking up. The internet will catch up here in a second and come back. Yeah, what if we did? You know, let's say Michael Jordan was in the NFL Hall of Fame, or you know, Kamala Harris, NFL Hall of Fame. Well, lastly, news that John Brennan can trust. Republicans introduced the Unborn Child Support Act that would allow moms to receive child support payments before giving birth. You're back, John. You're back. You hear me, John?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm on the last one here. If you haven't heard me, this is the last one here. Republicans introduced the Unborn Child Support Act that would allow moms to receive child support payments before giving birth. Now, when I read this, this is, you know, file this under the category that Republicans, if what the Democrats can do, the Republicans still find a dumber way to do it. Right?
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say the Republicans are about 2,000 years too late on the Child Support Act.
Yeah.
Right? God already gave us this. It's called marriage.
It's called family.
Yeah.
But it kind of blew my mind. Like Republicans, you know, because pro-life is winning right now, and the charge against Republicans is that we don't want to take care of the baby after it's born and all that stuff. So Republicans are like, well, I know how socialism can fix this.
Yeah.
I know.
Don't tell me the government can't solve this problem.
That's right.
We can. Yeah.
So that's right.
Well, here's the thing. I get it. All right. I get it. And I'm glad that babies are finally getting a little bit of protection, you know, under the law.
Under socialism? Under SCOTUS. Okay, under SCOTUS. Yeah.
Well, yeah, granted, but socialism, they're still getting, finally they're being recognized as at least people. You know, it at least does that. But here's the thing. You were talking about Bill Burr earlier, and Bill Burr is talking about abortion. He's taking shots at abortion. I don't know if you saw his clip.
Oh, I saw it.
It was fire. Yeah. And this is Bill Burr taking shots at abortion. It's like, for me, it's like hearing Gabriel Wrench make fun of open carry laws. It's that. It's that weird. You've got this foul-mouthed, unholy, irreverent pagan who's a better friend to babies than all of the liberal pastors in America combined.
That's right. That's right.
And these are the times we're living in. An unregenerated heathen is risking his career speaking truth while our self-proclaimed Catholic president stutters his way through a condemnation of the Supreme Court for overturning Roe versus Wade.
Did you see David Chappelle's show was canceled like 2 hours before he's supposed to have it?
Yeah.
What happened there? I mean, like to me, it's like I thought Dave Chappelle was uncancelable, and here we are, 2 hours before one of his major events, he got canceled.
No, it's great. It's great. All of this stuff is great. It's just leading to the acceleration of the destruction of this unholy new religion that has taken over our country. So
that's
good on them. Full speed ahead. And if you haven't heard, I can't recommend Bill Burr's comedy to family people. So
it's rough. It's rough.
Yeah, send your kids out of the room. Send your kids out of the room. But it is nails.
Yeah. Hey, John, thank you for coming on this week, man. Can't wait to see you in Knoxville, Tennessee, October 6th through the 8th at the Fight Laugh Feast Conference. I believe John and his daughter and the whole family will be out there partying with us. Yeah, that's the plan. Should be a blast. So thank you, John.
See you
next week.
See you.
Every week as you guys turn in to Water Break, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate you guys listening. I appreciate you guys sharing the show. My prayer, my goal for Water Break is that you are encouraged to find ways to engage with your gifts and your abilities. That you don't just kind of sit there, but you want to find ways to lead with your faith and not hide it under a bushel. And to live out the Lordship of Christ in every area of life, and particularly in how we engage in the public square. I got into cross politics a long time ago because I wanted to encourage Christians to apply their faith to politics and apply their faith to culture, to get out with their faith. So I pray God uses this show to change you and your city and your state and our country. So thank you for tuning in weekly. Share the show and hope to see you next week. This is the Water Boy with Water Break. Until next Sunday, go fight, laugh, and feast.
When tyrants take over, what's the first thing they do? Disarm. It happened in Russia, China, Germany, and most recently, Afghanistan. Why? Because disarmed people are easier to control. And over the last century and a half, American tyrants have been carrying out a slow, methodical disarmament that no one is talking about. State education. Tyrants know that education is warfare. Our rulers have a vested interest in making you totally harmless. They've got big plans and they don't want you getting in the way. Think about it. Would you rather fight an army decked out with high-powered rifles or a bunch of dinky water pistols? They know that if you can think critically, you're a threat. At New St. Andrews College, we want to graduate men and women who are dangerous. Dangerous to the world, dangerous to the principalities and powers, dangerous to spiritual wickedness in high places. Education can either arm you or disarm you. It can make you a threat or make you a useful idiot. So, where you get that education counts. Click the link to apply to New St. Andrews College today.
Hi, I'm Robert Borton, CEO of Classical Conversations, the world's largest classical Christian homeschooling community. I'm launching a new podcast, Refining Rhetoric. If you like cross politics or just listen to hear what crazy stuff they're saying today, you will enjoy Refining Rhetoric. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. I practice the 15 tools of learning by interviewing great guests, looking at current events, and talking about cryptocurrency.